The mask never comes off. I wake at the third bell to the sound of prayers echoing from the vox grills built into every wall of my hab block. The Emperor protects, they say. The Emperor judges, they say. The Emperor knows. But I know something they do not. The Emperor does not patrol the lower spires of Hive Tertius with a shock maul crackling at his belt and a bolt pistol heavy in his hand. The Emperor does not walk among the unwashed masses who spit and curse when they think no one can hear them. The Emperor does not see the hatred that burns in their eyes when they look upon his servants. I am Arbitrator Kael Morn of the Adeptus Arbites, and for 23 years I have been the law in the shadow of dying stars. My precinct covers 6 levels of the mid-spire, from the manufactorum districts where the air tastes of rust and sweat, to the merchant quarters where guild lords count their thrones behind armored glass. 3 million souls call this sector home. 3 million potential criminals. 3 million reasons why the Imperium endures only through fear. The carapace armor is ritual. Each piece has been blessed by Chaplain Voss, anointed with sacred oils, and inscribed with the litanies of justice. The gorget bears the skull and scales of our order. The pauldrons carry purity seals that flutter like dying moths in the recycled air. The helmet seals with a soft hiss, and suddenly the world becomes filtered through red-tinted lenses and the constant whisper of vox static. I am no longer Kael Morn. I am the law incarnate. I am fear given form. The shock maul hangs at my right hip, its power cell humming with barely contained energy. A touch of the activation stud and it could shatter bone, stop a heart, or cook a man's brain in his skull. The bolt pistol rests in its holster like a sleeping predator, each shell in its clip capable of turning a human torso into a crater of meat and splintered bone. These are not tools of justice. They are instruments of terror. And terror, I have learned, is the only language the masses truly understand. My first patrol begins before dawn in the Manufactorum district. The great machines never sleep, their rhythm a constant heartbeat that vibrates through the metal floors and into the bones of every worker. Steam hisses from coolant pipes. Sparks shower from welding stations. The air shimmers with heat and chemical fumes that would burn the lungs of anyone not born to breathe poison. Here, in the bowels of the hive, they make the components that keep our world alive: weapons parts, vehicle engines, the 10,000 pieces that comprise a single lasgun. They work 18-hour shifts and sleep in bunks stacked 6 high, and they hate us for it. I know they hate us because they cannot hide it completely. A worker pauses at his station when I pass, his hands trembling as he reaches for a welding torch. His supervisor, a scarred woman with oil-stained coveralls, watches me from the corner of her eye while pretending to inspect a gear assembly. A child, no more than 12, drops the tray of rations she was carrying and scrambles to clean up the spilled gruel while shooting glances in my direction. Fear radiates from them like heat from the forge fires. But underneath the fear, deeper and darker, I can feel the hatred burning. They hate us because we represent everything they can never be. We eat real meat while they subsist on protein paste. We live in private chambers while they crowd together like animals. We carry weapons while they may not even touch a knife without permit. We are the enforcers of a system that grinds them down until they are nothing more than cogs in a machine that does not know their names. And we do it not because we must, but because we can. The first incident comes at the shift change, when 10,000 workers flood the corridors like water through broken pipes. The crowd moves with practiced efficiency, born of necessity and fear. No one speaks above a whisper. No one makes eye contact. No one wants to be noticed. But today, someone stumbles. He is old, this worker, 60 years or more, though in the hive such age is nearly impossible to reach without augmetic assistance. His left arm has been replaced with a crude mechanical substitute, and his eyes are clouded with cataracts from decades of chemical exposure. When the crowd surges around him, he falls. Nothing more than an accident, a moment of clumsiness brought on by exhaustion and age. He falls, and his mechanical arm strikes the ferrocrete with a sound like breaking bells. I could help him up. Any decent human being would help him up, but I am not human. I am the Arbeits, I am the law, and the law does not show mercy to those who disrupt the peace. My shock maul is in my hand before I realize I have drawn it. The power field crackles to life with a sound like angry insects. The old man looks up at me from the floor, and I see something die in his eyes. Not hope. Hope died in him years ago. What dies is the last vestige of his dignity. Move along, I command, and my voice carries the authority of 10,000 years of imperial law. The crowd parts around the fallen man like oil around water. No one helps him. No one even looks at him. They have learned that to show compassion is to invite suspicion. To help the fallen is to risk falling yourself. The old man struggles to his feet, his mechanical arm whirring and clicking as servos strain against his weight. He does not look at me again. He knows better. He rejoins the crowd and is swept away like debris in a flood, and I holster my maul with a satisfaction that tastes like ash. This is what order looks like in the Imperium. This is what peace costs. One old man's dignity is a small price to pay for the compliance of 10,000 workers. Or so I tell myself as I continue my patrol. The merchant quarter is different. Here, the air is cleaner, filtered through expensive purification systems and scented with exotic incenses. The corridors are wider, the lighting warmer, the floors covered with imported carpets that cost more than a worker's lifetime wages. Guild merchants in fine robes conduct business behind reinforced glass while their private security watches from the shadows. These people do not hate us, they fear us, but it is a different kind of fear. It is the fear of those who have something to lose. A commotion draws my attention to a spice merchant's stall. Two men in guild colors argue with a woman whose clothes mark her as mid-hive nobility. The dispute appears to be over the price of saffron, that golden spice worth more than gold itself. The woman claims she has been overcharged. The merchants claim their prices are fair. Voices rise, accusations fly. In the lower hive, such a disagreement would already have ended in bloodshed. Here, they look to me for resolution, not because they trust my judgment, but because they fear my power. The woman expects me to side with her because of her station. The merchants expect me to side with them because of their guild connections. Neither understands that I will side with whichever option best serves the Imperium's interests. The spice in question is indeed overpriced, but only by the standards of the last century. Inflation is a constant in the Imperium, driven by endless war and the logistics of feeding a galaxy-spanning empire. The merchants are within their legal rights to charge whatever the market will bear. The woman is within her legal rights to refuse the purchase. Both are wasting my time with a dispute that serves no one but their own petty pride. The price stands, I declare, my voice carrying through the sudden silence that falls over the market. The woman's face flushes with indignation, but she does not dare argue. The merchants bow respectfully, but I see the relief in their eyes. Justice has been served, though no one is entirely satisfied. This too is the way of the Imperium. Perfect justice is impossible, but perfect compliance is achievable through the application of sufficient force. As I walk away from the spice merchant's stall, I catch a glimpse of something that stops me cold. A child, no more than 8 years old, watches me from behind her mother's robes. But it is not fear I see in her eyes. It is curiosity, wonder, perhaps even admiration. She sees the armor, the weapons, the symbols of authority, and she is not afraid. She is impressed. For a moment, I remember what it was like to be that child. I remember the day an arbitrator came to my school to speak about law and order. I remember the awe I felt as he spoke of justice and duty and service to the Emperor. I remember how proud I was when the aptitude tests marked me for Arbites training. I remember believing that I would make the galaxy a better place. The memory fades as quickly as it came, leaving only the taste of bitter irony. I nod to the child, a small gesture that sends her scurrying behind her mother's skirts. Even wonder can be dangerous in the wrong circumstances. Even children learn to fear those they once admired. My patrol continues through the residential sectors. where families crowd into hab blocks designed for half their number. The walls are thin, and privacy is a luxury few can afford. I hear fragments of conversation as I pass, a woman weeping over an empty ration card, a man cursing the foreman who work him 16 hours without break, children crying for food that will not come. These are not the sounds of rebellion, they are the sounds of despair, and despair, properly managed, is as useful as fear in maintaining order. At the intersection of Hab Block 7 and the main transit corridor, I encounter my first real challenge of the day. A crowd has gathered around something, their voices raised in the kind of excitement that makes my hand drift toward my weapon. As I approach, they part before me like smoke before flame, revealing the source of their agitation. A man lies dead in the corridor. His throat has been cut with surgical precision, and his blood pools around his head like a crimson halo. His clothes mark him as a mid-level administrator, the kind who processes work assignments and food distributions, the kind who decides who eats and who goes hungry, the kind who makes enemies simply by doing his job. Murder in the hive is not uncommon. In a population of millions packed into spaces designed for thousands, violence is inevitable. What makes this case interesting is not the death itself, but the way the crowd reacts to it. There is no grief, no shock, no calls for justice. There is only a grim satisfaction that speaks of long-nursed grudges finally settled. I kneel beside the body, my armor's sensors recording everything. The cut is clean, made with a blade that was both sharp and steady. The angle suggests someone of medium height, probably right-handed. There are no defensive wounds, which means the victim either knew his killer or was taken completely by surprise. The murder weapon is nowhere to be found, likely discarded in one of the refuse chutes that honeycomb the hive's structure. Who found the body? I ask, my voice amplified by the helmet's voxcasters. A woman steps forward, her hands clasped nervously before her. She is perhaps 40, with the prematurely aged look common to hive dwellers. Her work clothes mark her as a factory supervisor, someone with just enough authority to be trusted with small responsibilities. "I did, Lord Arbitrator," she says, using the honorific that protocol demands. "I was returning from the night shift when I saw him lying there. Did you see anyone else in the corridor?" "No, my lord. The transit ways were empty except for the usual traffic." Her answers are practiced, too perfect. She is lying, but not necessarily about anything important. In the hive, people learn to lie to authority as naturally as they learn to breathe. Truth is dangerous. Lies are survival. I look at the crowd that has gathered around us. 24 faces, all carefully neutral, all desperately trying not to appear involved. But I know that at least half of them know exactly who killed this man. They might even approve of it. In their world, justice is not something dispensed by the arbiters. It is something taken by those with the courage to act. "This man was murdered," I announce, my voice carrying across the corridor. "The killer will be found and punished according to imperial law. Anyone with information is required to come forward immediately." The silence that follows is absolute. Not one person speaks, not one person volunteers anything. They stand there like statues, their eyes fixed on points just past my shoulders, waiting for me to leave so they can return to their lives. They will not help me find the killer because they do not see the killing as a crime. In their minds, justice has already been served. Under imperial law, I have several options. I could order mass interrogations, using pain stimulators and truth serums to extract confessions. I could implement collective punishment, reducing the ration allocations for the entire sector until someone comes forward. I could simply execute a random selection of the crowd and let fear do the work of justice. Any of these options would likely produce results. Someone would confess, or provide information, or simply be tortured until they said what I wanted to hear. The case would be closed, the killer punished, and order restored. That is how the system is supposed to work. But as I look at these people, these downtrodden masses who work themselves to death for the glory of an empire that will never know their names, I find myself asking a question that has no place in an arbitrator's mind. Do they deserve justice? Or do they deserve mercy? The question is heretical. The law is absolute. The Emperor's will is incontrovertible. My duty is clear. And yet, the question lingers as I seal off the crime scene and begin the routine of filing reports that no one will read and conducting investigations that will lead nowhere. That evening, I return to my chambers in the Arbeits precinct house. The building is a fortress of black stone and steel, its walls covered with icons of justice and images of the Emperor's wrath. Here, surrounded by the symbols of my calling, I should find comfort. Instead, I find only the weight of another day's compromises with a system that grinds human dignity into dust. My quarters are spartanly furnished: a bed, a desk, a weapon rack, a small shrine to the Emperor. On the wall hangs my commission, signed by Sector Judge Vex herself, authorizing me to act as law and judge within my designated area of authority. Beside it hangs a mirror, and in that mirror I see the face of a man I no longer recognize. 23 years of service have carved lines around my eyes and turned my hair gray at the temples. 23 years of enforcing laws that serve only to maintain a status quo built on suffering. 23 years of telling myself that order is worth any price, that peace justifies any brutality, that the Emperor's will excuses any cruelty. I remove my helmet and set it on the weapon rack beside my bolt pistol. The shock maul goes into its charging cradle, where it will spend the night building power for tomorrow's violence. The armor plates are cleaned and oiled with ritual precision, each piece blessed and stored according to regulations that have not changed in 10 millennia. In the mirror, without the armor, I look almost human, almost like the man I was before I swore my oath to serve the Emperor's justice. But that man is gone, consumed by years of compromises and small cruelties. In his place stands something else, something harder, something colder, something that can look upon suffering and call it necessity. My dinner consists of protein cubes and recaf, the same meal I have eaten every night for longer than I care to remember. As I eat, I review the day's reports on my data slate. 3 minor infractions processed with summary fines, 1 public disturbance resolved through intimidation, 1 unsolved murder that will join the thousands of other unsolved crimes in the precinct's files. Another successful day in service to the Imperium. But success feels like failure when measured against the faces I saw today. The old man who fell in the corridor, the child who looked at me with wonder before learning to be afraid. The crowd that stood silent around a dead administrator, their silence speaking louder than any confession. These are the people I have sworn to protect, but protection in the Imperium means something very different than it does in the stories told to children. Sleep comes hard, filled with dreams of faceless crowds and empty corridors. I dream of the mask that never comes off, even when I try to remove it. I dream of voices crying for justice in a language I have forgotten how to understand. I dream of a young man in training fatigues, proud to serve the Emperor's will, not yet understanding what that service would cost him. I wake to the sound of prayers and the weight of another day's duty pressing down on my chest like a gravestone. The second day begins with an alarm klaxon that splits the dawn like a blade. Riot in Sector 12. All units respond immediately. The voice of Watch Commander Brashen crackles through the Vox network, calm and professional despite the chaos erupting 6 levels below my position. I am dressed and armed within minutes, muscle memory guiding me through the ritual of preparation. Carapace armor blessed and sealed, shock maul charged and ready. Bolt pistol loaded with mass reactive shells designed to punch through heavy clothing and bone with equal efficiency. Helmet locked in place, transforming my vision into the red-tinted perspective of the law incarnate. The riot lift carries me down through the hive's layers like a drop of blood through arteries of steel. Each level tells its own story of decline. The upper spires gleam with polished metal and filtered air. The middle levels show the wear of constant use but maintain the pretense of civilization. The lower reaches grow darker, more crowded, more desperate with each passing floor. Sector 12 occupies the boundary between the manufacturing districts and the deep underhive, where those who have nothing left to lose make their homes in the shadows. Here, the ceiling presses down like the lid of a coffin, and the air tastes of rust and despair. The corridors are narrow, designed for utility rather than comfort, and lined with hab blocks that house families of 8 in spaces meant for 2. As the lift descends, I can hear the riot growing louder, voices raised in anger, the crash of breaking glass, the rhythmic chanting that turns a crowd into a mob and individuals into something far more dangerous. By the time I reach Sector 12, the sound has become a roar that vibrates through the metal decking under my feet. The scene that greets me is controlled chaos. 2 squads of Arbites have formed a cordon across the main thoroughfare, their riot shields locked together in an unbreakable wall. Behind them, enforcer units wait with shock prods and gas dispensers. Above, on the maintenance gantries, snipers track targets through the scopes of long-last rifles. Everything is ready except the order to fire. Watch Commander Brashen stands behind the shield wall, his own armor scarred by decades of such conflicts. He turns as I approach, his helmet vox crackling with static. "Report," I demand, taking my position in the formation. "Food riots," he replies, his voice carrying the weary tone of someone who has seen this play out too many times. The protein shipment was contaminated. 3,000 ration packs had to be destroyed. The locals are not taking the news well. Through the gap between riot shields, I can see the mob that has gathered in the plaza beyond. Perhaps 200 people, maybe more, pressed together in a heaving mass of bodies and raised fists. They wave makeshift banners bearing slogans that would be treasonous if anyone bothered to read them. They chant demands for food, for justice, for someone to care that their children are starving while administrators feast in climate-controlled offices high above. At the front of the crowd, I spot the leaders. A man in factory coveralls, his augmetic arm raised like a banner of defiance. A woman with the bearing of a former Guard veteran, her voice carrying over the noise as she directs the mob's anger. A priest of some kind, though not one sanctioned by the ecclesiarchy, preaching about the emperor's love for the downtrodden. These are not professional agitators or trained revolutionaries. They are ordinary people pushed beyond their breaking point by a system that sees them as expendable components in a machine too vast to comprehend. They are dangerous precisely because they have nothing left to lose. Demands? I ask, though I already know the answer. Replacement rations, compensation for the contaminated food, investigation into how the contamination occurred. Brashen's tone suggests what he thinks of such requests. Standard riot response? Standard riot response involves tear gas, shock prods, and enough violence to scatter the crowd and arrest the leaders. It is efficient, tested, and guaranteed to end the disturbance within the hour. It is also guaranteed to leave dozens of civilians injured or dead, their only crime being hunger in a system that cannot afford to feed them. I study the crowd through my helmet's optical enhancers, watching faces twisted by desperation and rage. These people are not my enemies. They are citizens of the Imperium, subjects of the Emperor, human beings whose only failing is existing in a galaxy that has no place for human dignity. But they are also a threat to order, and order is the foundation upon which civilization rests. Hold position, I command. I want to hear what they have to say. Brashen's helmet turns toward me, and I can imagine the expression beneath the faceplate. In his experience, listening to rioters only encourages more riots. The law is absolute, and mercy is weakness. He has been an arbitrator longer than I have, and he has learned that the only language the masses understand is violence. But I step forward anyway, my boots ringing against the metal decking as I approach the line of riot shields. The crowd sees me coming, and their chanting falters as they recognize the symbols of ultimate authority emblazoned on my armor. Here stands not just a policeman, but the living embodiment of imperial law. Here stands someone who could order their deaths with a single word and face no consequences beyond a minor entry in his daily log. Citizens of the Imperium, I begin, my voice amplified by external speakers to carry over the crowd's murmur. You have assembled without permit in violation of civil order statutes. You have raised your voices in seditious chant. You have disrupted the peace that the Emperor demands of his subjects. The crowd stirs uneasily, but they do not disperse. The leaders stand firm, their eyes fixed on my helmet's red lenses. The man with the augmetic arm steps forward, his mechanical fist raised in defiance. "We demand food for our children," he calls out, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "We demand clean water. We demand the basic rights promised to all citizens of the Imperium. We demand justice for the corruption that poisoned our rations while the nobles feast in their towers." His words are technically treasonous. He has accused imperial officials of corruption without evidence. He has claimed rights that exist nowhere in imperial law. He has demanded justice from a system that recognizes only obedience. Under the Lex Imperialis, I could execute him where he stands and face no questions beyond a routine inquiry. Instead, I find myself asking, "What would you have me do?" The question surprises everyone, including myself. It is not the response of a proper arbitrator. It is the question of someone who still remembers what it means to be human. The augmetic man blinks in confusion, his mechanical arm wavering. Behind him, the crowd mutters uncertainly. They had prepared for violence, for the brutal suppression that always follows dissent in the Imperium. They had not prepared for someone in authority to actually listen. "Investigate," calls out the former guard veteran. "Find out why our food was poisoned. Punish those responsible. Replace what was destroyed. Treat us like human beings instead of cattle to be managed." Her requests are reasonable. More than reasonable. They are exactly what any decent system of government would provide as a matter of course. They are also impossible within the rigid hierarchy of imperial administration, where questioning a superior's competence is tantamount to heresy and admitting error is seen as weakness. I stand there for a long moment, surrounded by the weight of expectations I cannot meet. The rioters expect justice that I am not empowered to provide. My fellow arbitrators expect decisive action to restore order. The system expects me to choose between mercy and duty, knowing that mercy is not an option for someone wearing the skull and scales of the Adeptus Arbites. The choice, when it comes, feels inevitable. Disperse immediately, I command, my voice carrying the full weight of imperial authority. Return to your homes and workstations. Resume your duties as loyal citizens of the Imperium. This gathering is illegal and will not be tolerated. The disappointment in their faces cuts deeper than any blade. They had hoped, despite everything, that someone in authority might listen to their pleas. They had believed, for just a moment, that the system might show compassion for their suffering. Now they understand that hope itself is a luxury they cannot afford. The augmetic man's shoulders slump in defeat. The veteran woman shakes her head sadly. The unsanctioned priest bows his head in prayer for souls trapped in a system that has forgotten how to forgive. One by one, they begin to turn away, their dreams of justice dying in the recycled air of the lower hive. But not all of them leave. A core of perhaps 50 remains, the most desperate of the desperate, those who have already lost everything and have nothing more to fear. They link arms and begin to chant, not the angry slogans of before, but something softer, something that sounds almost like a hymn. "The Emperor protects," they sing, their voices blending into harmony despite the harsh acoustics of the metal corridor. "The Emperor provides. The Emperor loves his children." It is a song I learned as a child, taught in the scholars to instill faith and obedience. But in their voices, it becomes something different. It becomes an accusation. A reminder of promises that have been broken and faith that has been betrayed. They sing not of the Emperor who rules from his golden throne, but of the Emperor who supposedly cares for the lowest of his subjects. Watch Commander Brashen steps up beside me, his hand resting on the grip of his shock maul. "Orders, arbitrator?" The words stick in my throat like broken glass. These people are guilty of nothing more than believing the lies we tell children about the Imperium's benevolence. They are singing hymns, not seditious chants. They are praying, not rioting. but they are also defying a direct order from legitimate authority, and defiance cannot be tolerated regardless of its form. "Gas them," I whisper, the words barely audible even to myself. "Sir, deploy tear gas," I repeat, louder this time. "Disperse the remaining crowd. Arrest the leaders for incitement to riot." The order passes down the line like a disease, contaminating everyone it touches. Enforcer units move into position, their gas dispensers ready. Snipers adjust their aim to provide covering fire if the situation escalates. Medical teams prepare for casualties. The singing continues, even as the first canisters arc through the air and explode in clouds of choking white smoke. The hymn does not falter as men and women begin to cough and weep. They continue to sing even as their voices grow hoarse and their eyes stream with tears. The Emperor protects. They chant through the chemical fog, their words a challenge to everything I represent. The Emperor provides. The Emperor loves his children. The gas does its work with ruthless efficiency. Bodies collapse, overcome by the toxic cloud that burns their lungs and blinds their eyes. The few who try to run are caught by enforcer teams and beaten to the ground with shock prods. The leaders are dragged away in neural restraints, their augmetics sparking as the containment fields disrupt their mechanical components. Within 10 minutes, the plaza is empty except for the unconscious forms of those who had sung hymns while authority broke their bodies. The riot is over. Order has been restored. The system has proven once again that it will not tolerate even the gentlest form of dissent. I stand in the settling gas cloud, breathing filtered air through my helmet's purification system, and try to tell myself that I have done my duty. The law has been upheld. The peace has been preserved. The Emperor's will has been enforced through the application of appropriate force. But the song lingers in my memory, a haunting melody that speaks of faith betrayed and hope abandoned. The Emperor protects, they had sung, even as his servants prepared to gas them into submission. The Emperor provides, they had believed, even as their children starved in the depths of the hive. The Emperor loves his children, they had proclaimed, even as his justice fell upon them like a hammer upon flesh. As I walk back through the empty corridors of Sector 12, past the hab blocks where families huddle behind locked doors and pray that the violence will not find them, I begin to understand something that 23 years of service had failed to teach me. We are not the police of the Imperium. We are its executioners. We do not serve justice. We serve order, and order demands that hope be crushed before it can take root in hearts that have learned to expect nothing but suffering. The mask never comes off because the mask has become the face. The armor never comes off because beneath it lies nothing but shame. The law never bends because it was never meant to serve anyone but those who benefit from its rigidity. And in the depths of the hive, where the lights grow dim and the air grows thick, 3 million souls continue their daily struggle against a system that sees them not as citizens to be protected, but as problems to be managed. The Emperor protects. The children learn to sing in school. But down here, in the darkness where the Emperor's light cannot reach, we are the ones who decide what protection means. We are the police of Warhammer 40,000, and we are everything that is wrong with the universe we claim to serve. The third day brings no alarms, no riots, no immediate crises demanding the application of sanctioned violence. Instead, it brings something worse. Routine patrol through the hab blocks where yesterday's defeated rioters have returned to nurse their wounds and plan their quiet acts of rebellion. The aftermath of suppressed dissent has a particular texture to it, like the air before a thunderstorm but without the promise of cleansing rain. People move through the corridors with hunched shoulders and downcast eyes, but their silence carries an electric charge of barely contained fury. They have learned that hope is dangerous, but they have not yet learned to stop hoping. I walk among them in my armor of black ceramite and contempt, the skull and scales of the arbites catching the pale light of overhead lumens. My footsteps echo off metal walls covered in decades of grime and neglect, a percussion that announces the arrival of authority in places where authority is synonymous with pain. At the intersection of Corridor 7 and Hab Block Delta, I encounter my first test of the day. A woman sits on a folding stool beside a makeshift stall, selling items that skirt the edges of legality, recycled water filters that may or may not work, protein bars of questionable origin and even more questionable nutritional value, electronic components salvaged from industrial waste and repurposed for civilian use without proper imperial certification. Under the letter of the law, her entire operation is illegal. The goods are unlicensed, the stall is unpermitted, and she lacks the proper guild memberships required for commercial activity. I could arrest her, confiscate her merchandise, and sentence her to 6 months of penal servitude without requiring anything more than her presence in this place at this time. But she is not alone. 3 children sit behind her stall, sharing a single portion of gruel from a battered metal bowl. Their clothes are patched and repatched, held together by thread and desperation. Their faces show the hollow-cheeked look of chronic malnutrition. Their eyes carry the particular brightness that comes from hunger that has lasted so long it has become a constant companion. The woman herself might be 30 or 50 or anywhere in between. The hive ages people in ways that make chronology meaningless. Her hair is streaked with premature gray. Her hands show the calluses and chemical burns of factory work. Her eyes hold the exhausted resignation of someone who knows that each day survived is a small victory against impossible odds. She sees me approaching and begins to pack her goods with the quick efficiency of someone who has done this many times before. There is no panic in her movements, no desperate pleading for mercy. She knows the law as well as I do. She knows that what she is doing is illegal. She does it anyway because the alternative is watching her children starve while following regulations designed by people who have never wondered where their next meal will come from. "Citizen," I call out, my voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. She stops packing and looks up at me with eyes that hold neither fear nor hatred, only tired acceptance of whatever fate I choose to dispense. "Yes, Lord Arbitrator, your permit for commercial activity. It is not a question." We both know she has no permit. Permits cost money, require guild sponsorship, and involve background checks that would reveal her connection to yesterday's riot through her husband, the man with the augmetic arm who now lies unconscious in a detention cell 3 levels below. "I have no permit, my lord." Her honesty is either refreshing or damning, depending on perspective. A more experienced criminal would lie, produce forged documents, or at least attempt to bribe their way out of trouble. She simply states the truth and waits for judgment to fall. I look at the children behind her stall. The eldest cannot be more than 10. The youngest still has the soft features of infancy, despite the hunger that has already begun to sharpen her cheekbones. They watch me with the wariness of animals that have learned to fear predators, ready to run but too tired to move quickly. Under imperial law, I have not just the right but the duty to arrest this woman. Her crime is clear, her guilt established by her own admission. The sentence would be automatic: confiscation of goods, administrative fine equal to 6 months' wages, and imprisonment until the fine is paid. Since she obviously cannot pay such a fine, she would remain in custody indefinitely, her children left to survive on their own or enter the care of imperial orphanages that are little more than training camps for industrial servitude. This is what justice looks like in the Imperium. This is how order is maintained. This is the system I have sworn to uphold and defend. I reach for my shock maul, my fingers closing around the familiar weight of sanctioned violence. The woman's shoulders tense, but she does not flinch. She has made her choice and accepted its consequences. Her only concern now is for the children who depend on her illegal enterprise for their survival. But as my thumb hovers over the activation stud, I find myself looking not at a criminal but at a mother whose only crime is loving her children more than she fears the law. The shock maul remains in its holster, my hand falling back to my side with a weight that feels heavier than ceramite and steel. "Pack your stall," I command, my voice carrying none of its usual authority. "Move to a different location. Do not let me find you here again." The woman blinks in confusion, her hands frozen in the act of wrapping a water filter in recycled cloth. Behind her, the children look up with expressions of bewildered hope. This is not how encounters with the Arbites are supposed to end. "My lord," she whispers, as if afraid that speaking too loudly will break whatever spell has stayed my hand. "You heard me. Move along." She does not question the mercy she has been shown. Experience has taught her that gifts from authority are rare and fragile things, easily broken by too much scrutiny. Within moments, her stall is packed and she is hurrying down the corridor with her children trailing behind like a line of refugees fleeing disaster. I watch them disappear into the maze of side passages that honeycomb this section of the hive, and I try to tell myself that I have done the right thing, but right and wrong are luxuries that arbitrators cannot afford. There is only law and lawlessness, order and chaos, compliance and rebellion. By showing mercy, I have violated the very principles that keep the Imperium from collapsing into anarchy. Yet as I continue my patrol through the hab blocks, I find myself noticing things that I had trained myself to ignore. Children playing with toys made from industrial waste, their laughter a rare sound in corridors designed for function rather than joy. An elderly man teaching a group of youngsters to read using pages torn from technical manuals, their eager faces illuminated by the flickering light of a jury-rigged lumen strip. A woman tending to a makeshift garden in an abandoned storage alcove, coaxing life from soil that should not exist in the depths of a hive city. These are not the activities of criminals or rebels. They are the activities of human beings trying to maintain their humanity in a system designed to crush it. They represent hope, community, and the stubborn refusal of the human spirit to be reduced to mere components in an industrial machine. And I am the man sent to stop them. My vox bead crackles to life, dragging me back from dangerous thoughts to the immediate demands of duty. Watch Commander Brashen's voice cuts through the static with its usual professional detachment. "Arbitrator Morn, report to Sector 9 immediately. We have a situation requiring senior authority." Sector 9 sits at the junction between the residential hab blocks and the administrative district, where mid-level bureaucrats process the endless paperwork that keeps imperial civilization functioning. It is a place of grey corridors and grey people, where passion goes to die and creativity is strangled in red tape. If there is a disturbance here, it will not be the desperate violence of the food riots, but something more subtle and potentially more dangerous. The transit lift carries me up 3 levels, through layers of increasing bureaucratic importance. The corridors grow wider and better lit. The air becomes cleaner, filtered through purification systems that cost more than most workers earn in a lifetime. The people I pass wear the uniforms of clerks and administrators, their faces bearing the particular pallor of those who spend their lives under artificial light. I find the situation in Administrative Complex 7, a maze of cubicles and offices where the business of governance is conducted by people who will never see the consequences of their decisions. 3 arbites have cordoned off a section of the main floor, their presence causing nervous murmurs among the administrators who pretend to work while stealing glances at the unfolding drama. At the center of the cordon stands a desk that has been overturned, its contents scattered across the floor in a pattern that speaks of deliberate vandalism rather than accidental damage. Papers bearing official seals lie torn and trampled. A cogitator terminal has been smashed, its screen dark and lifeless. And spray painted on the wall behind the desk, in letters 2 feet high and dripping red paint, are the words, "The Emperor weeps for his children." Watch Commander Brashen approaches as I survey the scene, his helmet reflecting the harsh overhead lighting. Even through the vox distortion, I can hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Vandalism and sedition, arbitrator. The perpetrator left us quite a message." I study the graffiti more closely, noting the careful lettering and the quality of the paint used. This was not a random act of violence by someone pushed beyond their breaking point. This was planned, deliberate, and executed by someone with access to materials not available to ordinary citizens. Do we have the perpetrator? Detained in Conference Room 3, Junior Administratum Clerk Helena Voss, 26 years of age, exemplary service record, no prior infractions, claims she acted alone. Helena Voss. The name means nothing to me, but in the Imperium, individual names rarely matter. What matters is the threat she represents to the carefully maintained order that keeps billions of people compliant with a system designed to exploit them. Motive? claims her younger brother died of malnutrition while she processed food distribution requests from her desk, says she couldn't bear the irony anymore. The explanation strikes me like a physical blow. Here is someone who worked within the system, who believed in its fairness, who trusted that doing her job properly would somehow make things better. She had spent her days processing requests for food that would never come, approving distributions that would never happen, filing reports that no one would ever read. And when the system she served so faithfully killed her brother through deliberate neglect, she finally understood what her role really was. She was not an administrator. She was an accomplice. "Interview room?" I ask, though I already know the answer. "Ready when you are, sir." Conference room 3 has been converted into a temporary interrogation facility, its windows blocked and its recording equipment activated. Helena Voss sits at the metal table in the center of the room, her hands cuffed in front of her with neural restraints that will deliver painful shocks if she attempts to move too quickly. She is younger than I expected, with the soft features of someone who has never known real hardship until recently. But her eyes tell a different story. They hold the hollow look of someone who has seen too much truth too quickly, whose faith in the system has been shattered by direct contact with its consequences. She looks up as I enter, and I see not fear but a terrible kind of relief, as if being caught has freed her from the burden of pretending to believe in what she was doing. "Helena Voss," I begin, taking the seat across from her. "Junior clerk, 3rd class, assigned to food distribution processing for sectors 8 through 12. 17 months of service, performance ratings consistently above standard." 18 months, she corrects quietly. "My service anniversary was last week." The precision of her correction tells me everything I need to know about her psychology. She is someone who values accuracy, who takes pride in doing things correctly, who believes that attention to detail matters. These are exactly the qualities that make good administrators and dangerous dissidents. "Tell me about your brother." Her composure cracks slightly, a tremor passing through her hands as the neural restraints detect and suppress her emotional response. When she speaks, her voice carries the flat tone of someone reciting facts to avoid confronting feelings. "Marcus Voss, age 14, employed as a maintenance apprentice in the lower manufactorums, died 3 weeks ago of protein deficiency complicated by respiratory infection." The medical examiner listed the cause of death as natural causes related to nutritional insufficiency. Natural causes, I repeat, tasting the bitter irony of the phrase. In the Imperium, starvation is considered natural, an inevitable result of resource scarcity rather than administrative choice. It is not murder if the system kills you through indifference rather than malice. "I processed his food allocation request myself," she continues, her voice growing stronger as anger replaces grief. "Form 7743 Delta, requesting increased protein rations for miners engaged in hazardous industrial work. The request was approved at 3 levels, stamped and filed properly. Assigned requisition number 445,581 Gamma. But the food never came. The food never came. The requisition was lost in processing. The approval was voided due to budget constraints. The allocation was redirected to administrative personnel as a morale enhancement measure." Her eyes meet mine across the table, and I see in them the cold fury of someone who has learned that her brother's death was not an accident, but a choice made by people who had never seen his face. "So you decided to take justice into your own hands." "I decided to tell the truth." She gestures toward the wall where her message still drips in red paint. "The Emperor weeps for his children. That's not sedition, arbitrator. That's scripture." 3rd Book of Imperial Saints, Chapter 12, Verse 7. "And the Master of mankind looked upon the suffering of his people, and his heart was moved to tears of infinite compassion." She is right, of course. The phrase comes directly from approved religious texts, taught in every schola and recited in every prayer service throughout the Imperium. But context matters more than content in imperial law. The same words that inspire faith when spoken from a pulpit become sedition when painted on the wall of an administrative complex by someone whose brother died while bureaucrats debated budget allocations. You destroyed imperial property. You disrupted government operations. You created public disturbance through unauthorized political expression. I told the truth about a system that murders children while calling it natural causes. Her defiance is absolute, unburdened by any hope of mercy or survival. She has already accepted that her actions will result in her death, either through immediate execution or gradual destruction in a penal facility. What she cannot accept is returning to her desk to process more requests for food that will never arrive while more brothers and sisters die of neglect that masquerades as inevitability. Under imperial law, her fate is sealed. Destruction of government property carries a sentence of 5 years hard labor. Seditious expression carries a sentence of 20 years imprisonment or immediate execution at the discretion of the presiding arbitrator. Creating public disturbance during a time of civil unrest carries an automatic death penalty. But as I look at this young woman who destroyed her life and career to speak a single moment of truth, I find myself questioning not her guilt but the system that made her crime necessary. She is guilty of vandalism, but the Imperium is guilty of murder. She is guilty of sedition, but the Imperium is guilty of betraying every promise it makes to its citizens. She is guilty of disturbing the peace, but what peace can exist in a system built on the deliberate starvation of children? Arbitrator? Watch Commander Brashen's voice crackles through my vox bead. Do you require assistance with the interrogation? I key the transmitter with a hand that feels heavy as lead. Negative. Continue securing the scene. I'll handle the prisoner processing. Helena Voss watches me with eyes that hold no illusions about her fate. She knows what happens to people who speak truth to power in the Imperium. She has probably processed the death certificates herself, filed under natural causes or administrative necessity, or the 100 other euphemisms used to disguise state-sanctioned murder. You could have kept quiet, I tell her, though I'm not sure if it's an accusation or an observation. You could have transferred to a different department, requested reassignment, found a way to avoid confronting the truth about what your job really was. I could have, she agrees, but then I would have been complicit in the murder of the next child who died while I processed forms for food that would never come. How many brothers and sisters would I have to watch die before I admitted that I was part of the machine that killed them? Her question hangs in the air between us, unanswered and unanswerable, because the truth is that I have been asking myself the same question for 23 years, and I have never found an answer that lets me sleep peacefully. How many riots have I suppressed to maintain order that benefits only those who never see its cost? How many desperate people have I arrested for the crime of trying to feed their families? How many small acts of human kindness have I crushed in the name of regulations designed by people who mistake cruelty for strength? The mask never comes off because underneath it lies the face of a man who has spent his life serving a system that destroys everything it claims to protect. The armor never comes off because beneath it lies the soul of someone who has forgotten the difference between justice and revenge, between law and oppression, between duty and collaboration. I stand up from the table, my ceramite boots ringing against the metal floor like bells tolling for the dead. Helena Voss watches me with something that might be compassion, as if she understands the weight of the choice I am about to make. The charges against you are serious, I begin, my voice carrying the formal cadence required by imperial legal protocol. Under the authority vested in me by the Adeptus Arbites and the will of the Emperor himself, I find you guilty of destruction of imperial property, seditious expression, and disturbance of the peace. Her face remains calm, accepting the verdict she had expected from the moment she picked up the spray paint and decided that truth was worth more than life. However, I continue, and the word hangs in the air like a prayer, given the extenuating circumstances of your case and your previously exemplary service record, I am commuting your sentence to administrative punishment. You are hereby dismissed from imperial service with loss of benefits and barred from future government employment. You will serve 6 months of community service in the lower hive districts, specifically in food distribution centers where your experience can be put to constructive use. The silence that follows is absolute. Helena Voss stares at me with eyes wide with disbelief, as if she cannot quite process what she has heard. Through my helmet's vox pickup, I can hear her breathing quicken with something that might be hope. "Arbitrator," she whispers, "I don't understand." "The Emperor weeps for his children," I reply, echoing the words she had painted on the wall. Perhaps it's time someone listened to his tears. I key my Vox transmitter and contact Watch Commander Brashen. The prisoner has been processed and sentenced to administrative punishment. Release her to community service supervision. Case closed. The questions I hear in Brashen's response tell me that my decision will not go unexamined. There will be reports to file, justifications to provide, explanations to give to superiors who measure success by the weight of punishment dispensed rather than the quality of justice served. But as I watch Helena Voss walk out of the interrogation room, her step lighter despite the uncertain future that awaits her, I find that I do not care about the consequences of my choice. For the first time in 23 years of service, I have acted like a human being rather than an instrument of oppression. The mask may never come off, but perhaps, for just a moment, I have remembered what lies beneath it. The fourth day begins with a summons to the precinct fortress, that black monolith of imperial justice that rises from the heart of the administrative district like an accusation made of stone and steel. The message arrives at the third bell, carried by a servo skull whose hollow eye sockets regard me with the cold indifference of mechanical duty. Arbitrator Kale Morn. It intones in the flat monotone of Vox synthesis. You are commanded to appear before Sector Judge Vex at the sixth bell for review of recent case dispositions. Failure to comply will result in disciplinary action under Article 7 of the Arbeits Code. The Emperor protects. The servo skull hovers for a moment, its anti-grav motors whining softly, before turning and disappearing into the labyrinthine corridors of the hive. I watch it go with a growing sense of inevitability, knowing that my moment of mercy has not gone unnoticed by those who measure justice in terms of fear dispensed and order maintained. Sector Judge Vex is a legend within the Arbeits, a woman who has served the Emperor's law for longer than most people have been alive. She has presided over thousands of cases, condemned millions to death or servitude, and never once shown mercy to those who challenge imperial authority. Her reputation for absolute adherence to the letter of the law is matched only by her contempt for weakness in any form. The fortress itself embodies her philosophy, all harsh angles and unforgiving surfaces designed to remind visitors that they stand in the presence of absolute power. Gothic arches soar overhead like frozen screams. Gargoyles carved in the likeness of the Emperor's enemies watch from every corner with eyes that seem to follow movement with predatory interest. The very air tastes of incense and fear, a combination that has flavored this place for centuries. I make my way through corridors that I have walked 1,000 times before, past the holding cells where the enemies of order await their fate, past the courtrooms where justice is dispensed with mechanical efficiency, past the armories where instruments of law enforcement wait in pristine rows like soldiers at attention. Judge Vex's chambers occupy the highest level of the fortress, their windows offering a panoramic view of the hive city that stretches to the horizon in all directions. From here, the Imperium subjects look like insects, tiny figures scurrying through canyons of metal and stone according to patterns too vast for any individual mind to comprehend. It is a view designed to remind visitors of their place in the cosmic order and of the power wielded by those who sit in judgment over millions. The judge herself sits behind a desk carved from a single piece of black marble, its surface inlaid with silver representations of the scales of justice and the skull of imperial authority. She does not look up as I enter, her attention apparently focused on the data slate that glows with soft blue light before her. But I know she is aware of my presence, cataloging my posture, my bearing, my worthiness to serve as an instrument of her will. Judge Vex is ancient by any reasonable measure, her face lined with decades of rendering harsh verdicts and harder choices. Her hair is white as bleached bone, pulled back in a severe style that emphasizes the sharp angles of her cheekbones and jaw. Her eyes are the pale blue of winter sky, cold and seemingly capable of seeing through flesh and bone to the soul beneath. When she finally speaks, her voice carries the authority of someone who has never doubted her right to decide who lives and who dies. Arbitrator Morn, 23 years of exemplary service to the Emperor's law, commendations for valor in the Sector Rebellion of 987, recognition for exceptional performance during the purge of Hab Block Tertius, a record unblemished by compromise or weakness. She pauses, allowing the weight of my past achievements to settle between us like a foundation upon which judgment might be built. Until yesterday, the word falls like a blade, cutting through any illusion I might have harbored that my recent decisions had gone unnoticed. Judge Vex finally looks up from her data slate, those winter-pale eyes fixing on mine with uncomfortable intensity. Tell me about Helena Voss. The question is deceptively simple, but I know that my answer will determine whether I leave this room as an arbitrator or as a prisoner awaiting execution for dereliction of duty. The facts of the case are clear and undisputed. Helena Voss committed acts of vandalism and sedition. Under imperial law, she should have been executed immediately or sentenced to decades of penal servitude. Instead, I showed mercy. Helena Voss, junior administratum clerk, committed acts of vandalism against imperial property and seditious expression through unauthorized political messaging. I found her guilty of all charges and sentenced her to 6 months of community service in recognition of her previously exemplary record and the extenuating circumstances of her case. Extenuating circumstances. Judge Vex repeats the phrase as if tasting something unpleasant. Elaborate. The defendant's brother died of malnutrition while she processed food distribution requests as part of her official duties. Her actions, while illegal, were motivated by grief and frustration with a system that she felt had failed her family. Grief and frustration. Another pause, another taste of distaste. And these emotional states, in your judgment, justify leniency toward acts of sedition and destruction of government property. The trap is carefully laid, but I can see its edges clearly enough. Judge Vex wants me to admit that I allowed personal feelings to override legal requirements, that I placed mercy above duty, that I have proven myself unfit to serve as an instrument of imperial justice. The correct answer is to confess my error, accept whatever punishment she deems appropriate, and promise never again to let weakness influence my judgment. But I find myself thinking of Helena Voss walking out of the interrogation room with hope in her eyes for the first time in months. I think of the children huddled behind their mother's illegal stall, their faces bright with the possibility that authority might show compassion. I think of the old man who fell in the corridor and the dignity that died in his eyes when I drew my shock maul. No, Judge Vex, they do not justify leniency. Her eyebrows rise slightly, the only sign of surprise she allows herself to show. However, I continue, they do justify questioning whether the law as written serves the Emperor's true will or merely the convenience of those who administer it. The silence that follows is profound, broken only by the distant hum of air recyclers and the soft whisper of data processing from the fortress's machine spirit. Judge Vex leans back in her chair, her pale eyes never leaving mine, as if trying to determine whether I have spoken heresy or simple truth. Explain. The single word carries the weight of command, but also something else. Curiosity, perhaps. Or the faint possibility that even someone as rigid as Judge Vex occasionally questions the system she serves with such absolute devotion. Helena Voss served the Imperium faithfully for 18 months. She processed food distribution requests with accuracy and efficiency that exceeded performance standards. She believed in the system she served, trusted that her work made a difference in the lives of imperial citizens. I pause, choosing my words carefully. What I say next will either vindicate my actions or condemn us both. When her brother died of starvation while food allocation requests sat approved but unprocessed on administrators' desks, she learned that her faith had been misplaced. She discovered that the system she served so loyally was designed not to help imperial citizens, but to create the illusion of help while maintaining profitable inefficiency. You speak of the imperial administration as if it were some criminal enterprise rather than the divine machinery of the emperor's will. I speak of a specific case where administrative incompetence resulted in the death of a 14-year-old boy whose only crime was believing that the Imperium would honor its obligations to its citizens. Judge Vex stands and walks to the great windows that dominate one wall of her chambers. Below us, the hive stretches away in every direction, millions of souls packed into spaces designed for thousands, their lives governed by regulations they cannot understand and decisions made by people they will never meet. Do you know what I see when I look out these windows, arbitrator? No, Judge. Order. Millions of individuals living and working according to patterns established by 10,000 years of imperial law. They wake at prescribed times, work at assigned tasks, consume allocated resources, and sleep in designated spaces. They do this not because they choose to, but because the law requires it, and we enforce that requirement. She turns back to face me, her expression unreadable. That order is not maintained through kindness, Morn. It is not sustained by mercy or compassion or the other soft virtues that make people feel better about themselves. It is maintained through fear. Fear of punishment, fear of authority, fear of the consequences that follow disobedience. And what happens when that fear becomes hatred? The question slips out before I can stop it, revealing thoughts I had not meant to voice. But Judge Vex does not react with anger or surprise. Instead, she returns to her desk and picks up another data slate, this one glowing with red priority markers. Hatred, properly managed, can be as useful as fear. More useful, in some circumstances. Hatred directed at external enemies unifies populations. Hatred directed at specific individuals can be channeled into productivity. Hatred directed at abstract concepts like injustice or corruption can be safely ignored as long as it does not translate into action. She activates the data slate's holographic display, and the air above her desk fills with images that make my blood run cold. Surveillance footage from the lower hive, showing crowds gathering in hidden spaces. Audio recordings of conversations that skirt the edges of sedition. Personnel files of individuals whose loyalty ratings have declined in recent months. What cannot be tolerated is hope. Hope that things might change. Hope that authority might show weakness. Hope that the system might bend to accommodate individual needs rather than collective requirements. The images shift and focus, showing me faces I recognize. The woman with the illegal stole, the former guard veteran who had spoken at the food riot, the unsanctioned priest who had led prayers during the gas attack, all of them flagged for surveillance, their activities monitored, their associates documented. Your mercy toward Helena Voss was observed by 17 imperial citizens who witnessed her arrest and release. Word of your leniency has spread through the lower levels like a contagion, inspiring hope in places where hope has been successfully suppressed for decades. New images appear in the holographic display, graffiti similar to Helena's message appearing on walls throughout the residential districts. Small acts of defiance that would normally be ignored, suddenly becoming patterns of coordinated resistance. People gathering in groups to discuss grievances they had previously accepted as inevitable. Hope, Arbitrator Morn, is a luxury that the Imperium cannot afford. Not because hope is evil, but because hope leads to expectations. Expectations lead to demands. Demands lead to resistance. And resistance leads to the kind of chaos that destroys civilizations. I watch the surveillance footage play out in front of me, seeing the consequences of my moment of mercy spreading through the hive like cracks in a dam. Judge Vex is right, of course. By showing compassion to Helena Voss, I have inspired others to believe that authority might be reasoned with, that the system might respond to appeals for justice. It is a beautiful and terrible thing to witness. People who had accepted their suffering as inevitable are beginning to imagine that it might be changed. Workers who had never questioned their conditions are starting to ask why they must endure what others do not. Children who had been taught to fear authority are beginning to wonder if authority might sometimes be wrong. What would you have me do? Judge Vex deactivates the holographic display, and the evidence of my crime disappears back into digital storage. But the weight of what I have seen continues to press down on my chest like a gravestone. Helena Voss will be transferred to a maximum security penal facility for the remainder of her natural life. The surveillance footage of her release will be explained as a clerical error that has been corrected. Those who witnessed her lenient treatment will be questioned to ensure they understand that no mercy was actually shown. And me? You will continue in your duties as before, but you will understand that mercy is not an option available to servants of imperial justice. The law is absolute not because it is perfect, but because alternatives to the law are invariably worse. She returns to her desk and picks up a different data slate, one that glows with the soft green of approved operations. Tomorrow you will lead a pacification sweep through the residential sectors where hope has begun to take root. You will arrest those who have been inspired by your moment of weakness. You will demonstrate that the Imperium's justice is as implacable as its enemies claim, and as merciless as its survival requires. The orders are clear, unambiguous, and utterly without compromise. I will take my fellow arbitrators into the lower hive and crush the spark of hope that my mercy has kindled. I will arrest the innocent along with the guilty, the dreamers along with the rebels, the children who believe in justice along with the adults who have learned to expect none. Yes, Judge. Before you go, arbitrator, consider this. The Emperor sits upon his golden throne not because he is kind, but because he is necessary. The Imperium endures not because it is just, but because it is strong. We serve not because we love our duty, but because someone must do what others cannot. I bow and turn to leave, but her voice stops me at the door. The mask never comes off, Morn. Not because we enjoy wearing it, but because the face beneath is too terrible for ordinary mortals to bear. Remember that when you begin to question whether mercy has a place in imperial justice. The corridor outside her chambers feels different as I walk back through the fortress, past the holding cells and armories and courtrooms where the machinery of oppression continues its eternal work. The Gothic arches seem to press down more heavily. The gargoyles seem to watch with more malevolent interest. The very air seems thick with the weight of decisions that cannot be undone. I think of Helena Voss, who by now has probably been collected from her community service assignment and transferred to a transport bound for a penal facility where hope goes to die. I think of the children who will grow up believing that authority might show compassion, only to learn through bitter experience that such beliefs are dangerous delusions. I think of the crowds who will gather tonight in hidden places to whisper about justice, not knowing that every word they speak is being recorded for use against them. Tomorrow, I will put on my armor and take up my weapons and lead a pacification sweep that will crush the hope I accidentally kindled. I will arrest mothers and fathers whose only crime is believing their children deserve better. I will destroy the fragile communities that have begun to form around shared dreams of justice. I will demonstrate once again that in the Imperium of mankind, mercy is not just forbidden but actively punished. The mask never comes off because the man beneath it has become complicit in a system so vast and terrible that resistance seems impossible and collaboration feels like the only path to survival. The armor never comes off because it has become a shell protecting not the world from me but me from the world I have helped create. And in the depths of the hive, where 3 million souls struggle against a system designed to grind them into components for a machine that does not know their names, the police of Warhammer 40,000 continue their eternal patrol, maintaining order through fear and crushing hope wherever it dares to bloom. The 5th day arrives with the sound of boots on metal decking, the harsh rhythm of an army preparing for war against its own people. I stand in the armory of Precinct Fortress Tertius, watching my fellow arbitrators prepare for the pacification sweep that will demonstrate the true nature of imperial justice. 24 men and women in ceramite plate armor, each one a veteran of countless encounters with those who dare to question the system that defines their lives. They check their weapons with the practiced efficiency of professional killers. Bolt pistols loaded with mass-reactive rounds designed to punch through human flesh and bone. Shock mauls charged to deliver voltages that can stop a heart or cook a brain. riot shields locked and loaded with enough charge to repel anything short of heavy weapons fire. Watch Commander Brashen addresses the assembled force, his voice carrying clearly through the helmet comlinks that bind us together in purpose if not conscience. Intelligence indicates widespread seditious activity throughout residential sectors 7 through 12, unauthorized gatherings, distribution of inflammatory materials, expression of anti-imperial sentiment. Standard pacification protocols are authorized. Resistance will be met with appropriate force. Appropriate force. The phrase has a clinical precision that masks the reality of what we are about to do. We will break down doors and drag people from their beds. We will separate children from parents and husbands from wives. We will fill transport cages with human beings whose only crime is believing that suffering might be alleviated rather than simply endured. Are there questions? Brashen asks, though his tone suggests that questions are neither expected nor welcome. Silence greets his inquiry. These are veteran enforcers who have conducted such operations hundreds of times before. They know what is expected of them, and they know that hesitation or doubt will be interpreted as weakness unworthy of the Arbites uniform. But I find myself raising my hand anyway, a gesture that draws surprised looks from my colleagues. Arbitrator Morn? Rules of engagement for non-combatants. The question is routine, required by regulations that specify how Imperial forces should handle civilians during urban operations. But in the context of this particular mission, it carries implications that make several of the assembled arbitrators shift uncomfortably. Standard protocols apply. Brashen replies after a moment's hesitation. Civilians who cooperate will be processed according to their level of involvement in seditious activities. Those who resist will be dealt with accordingly. Another clinical phrase that means we will kill anyone who tries to protect their family, their neighbors, or their community from the violence we are about to inflict. Resistance, in this context, includes anything from armed opposition to simply refusing to unlock a door when ordered to do so. The transport that carries us down to the residential levels is filled with the quiet tension that precedes violence. Through the small windows, I watch the hive's architecture change as we descend through layers of increasing desperation. The corridors grow narrower, the lighting grows dimmer. The air grows thicker with the accumulated waste of millions of human beings packed into spaces never meant to hold them. Our first target is Hab Block Delta 7, where surveillance has detected unauthorized gatherings and the distribution of materials questioning food allocation procedures. Intelligence reports suggest a cell of 12 to 15 individuals led by a former factory supervisor named Jorik Venn, whose only apparent crime is organizing community meetings where residents discuss their problems and seek collective solutions. The Hab block itself is a monument to utilitarian architecture, all right angles and efficient space usage designed by people who will never have to live in the structures they create. 15 levels of residential units, each one housing families of 6 to 8 in spaces originally intended for 2. The corridors are lined with water pipes that drip constantly, creating pools of rust-stained moisture that never fully dry. The air recycling system struggles against the biological load, filling every breath with the scent of too many people living too close together. We move through these corridors like a plague, our armored forms blocking the narrow passages and forcing residents to press themselves against walls to avoid being trampled. Children peek out from doorways with wide eyes that reflect our helmet lenses, their parents pulling them back into the safety of homes that offer no real protection from authorities' reach. The gathering we seek is easy to find. Voices carry clearly through the thin walls, raised not in anger but in the kind of reasoned discussion that imperial law considers more dangerous than any riot. They are talking about water purification, about organizing collective purchasing of medical supplies, about establishing a school where children can learn more than basic industrial skills. These conversations represent everything the Imperium fears most: the possibility that its subjects might organize themselves, might discover that their problems are shared rather than individual, might begin to imagine solutions that do not depend on the benevolence of distant authority. Brashen signals for positions, and we surround the meeting room with practiced efficiency. Escape routes are blocked, communications are jammed. The trap is complete before its victims even realize they are in danger. The door is not locked. There is no need for locks in a community where trust still exists, and privacy is a luxury few can afford. Brashen kicks it open anyway, the sound of splintering metal announcing our arrival like a funeral bell. 23 people sit in a rough circle, their faces turned toward us with expressions that shift rapidly from surprise to confusion to the terrible understanding that hope has led them into a trap. They are not criminals or revolutionaries. They are mothers and fathers, workers and retirees, young people and old, united only by the belief that they might make their lives marginally better through collective action. At the center of the circle sits Jorik Ven, a man of perhaps 50 with the scarred hands of someone who has spent his life working with dangerous machinery. His face shows the lines that come from years of accepting responsibility for others, of making decisions that affect not just himself but his community. When he sees us, he does not run or resist. He simply stands and faces us with the dignity of someone who has already accepted the consequences of his choices. "Citizens of the Imperium," Brashen announces, his voice amplified by external speakers, "you are under arrest for unlawful assembly, seditious conspiracy, and distribution of materials harmful to public order." The words hang in the air like an executioner's sentence. Several of the gathered residents begin to weep, not from fear of physical pain but from the understanding that their dreams of a better life are about to die in neural restraints and detention cells. But Jorik Ven does not weep. He looks at each of us in turn, his eyes searching for some sign of humanity beneath our armor and authority. When his gaze meets mine, I see something I was not prepared for: pity, not for himself or his followers, but for us. For the choice we have made to serve a system that destroys communities in the name of order. "We have committed no crimes," he says quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "We have harmed no one. We have simply tried to make our lives and our children's lives a little better." "Seditious assembly is a crime under imperial law," Brashen replies. "Questioning resource allocation procedures is a crime under imperial law. Organizing collective action without proper authorization is a crime under imperial law." Then the law is wrong. The words fall like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that spread through both the arrested residents and the arresting officers. Even I, who have spent the last several days questioning the system I serve, am surprised by the simple directness of Ven's statement. He has not claimed innocence under the law. He has not argued legal technicalities or pleaded for mercy. He has simply stated what everyone in this room knows but no one has dared to say, that a law which criminalizes hope and community is fundamentally illegitimate regardless of the authority that enforces it. "Gag him," Brashen orders, his voice tight with anger at the audacity of someone who would question imperial law so directly. "Process the lot of them for transport to detention facilities." The next hour passes in a blur of neural restraints and identification procedures, of tears and protests that go unheeded, of human dignity systematically stripped away in the name of maintaining order. The residents of Hab Block Delta 7 are loaded into transport cages like livestock being shipped to slaughter, their only crime being the belief that they might improve their circumstances through cooperation rather than resignation. But Jorik Ven's words continue to echo in my mind as we move to our next target. The law is wrong. Not technically incorrect or poorly applied, but fundamentally, morally wrong. A law that makes criminals of people who simply want to live with dignity, a law that equates hope with sedition and community with conspiracy. Our second target is a food distribution center where someone has been providing extra rations to families with children, violating allocation procedures designed to ensure that resources are distributed according to bureaucratic efficiency rather than human need. The perpetrator is a woman named Sarah Chen, a distribution supervisor whose 20 years of faithful service have apparently been contaminated by dangerous compassion. We find her at her post, continuing to work even though she must know that her crimes have been discovered. She processes ration cards with the same careful attention to detail that has marked her entire career, making notations in ledgers that will outlast her by decades, ensuring that the business of feeding the masses continues even as authority prepares to punish her for feeding them too well. When she sees us approaching, she does not flee or resist. She simply finishes the transaction she was processing, hands the completed ration card to the citizen who was waiting for it, and then turns to face judgment with the calm acceptance of someone who has chosen principle over survival. "Sarah Chen," I announce, my voice carrying the weight of imperial authority, "you are under arrest for violation of resource allocation protocols and unauthorized distribution of imperial property." "I gave extra food to hungry children," she replies simply. "If that is a crime worthy of death, then your system is the one that should be on trial." The citizen she was helping, an elderly man with the bent posture of someone who has spent decades in the manufactorums, clutches his ration card and stares at us with eyes that hold more sadness than fear. "She feeds us when the allocations run short," he says quietly. "She makes sure the children eat first. She is the only mercy we have ever seen from the Imperium." "Move along, citizen," Brashin commands, his shock maul crackling with warning energy. "This matter does not concern you." But the old man does not move. Instead, he places himself between us and Sarah Chen, his frail form a pathetic barrier against our armor and weapons. "It concerns all of us. She is not a criminal. She is the only decent person in this entire system, and you are going to destroy her for showing kindness." Others begin to gather, drawn by the commotion or by some instinct that tells them something important is happening. A crowd forms around us, not threatening or violent, but simply present, witnessing, bearing silent testimony to what imperial justice looks like when it encounters ordinary human goodness. The situation is escalating beyond the parameters of a simple arrest. These people are not armed rebels or dangerous dissidents. They are citizens of the Imperium who have been pushed to the breaking point by watching authority punish compassion while rewarding cruelty. But their mere presence constitutes a threat to public order, and threats to public order must be suppressed regardless of their moral justification. "Disperse immediately," Brashin orders, his voice amplified to carry over the murmur of the growing crowd. "Return to your homes and duties. Anyone remaining in this area after 1 minute will be arrested for unlawful assembly." The crowd does not disperse. If anything, more people arrive, drawn by words spreading through the hab blocks that someone is finally standing up to authority, that the system's victims are refusing to scatter like frightened animals. They link arms and begin to sing, the same hymn I heard during the food riot days ago. "The Emperor protects." Their voices blend together in harmony despite the harsh acoustics of the distribution center. "The Emperor provides." The Emperor loves his children. But this time, the hymn sounds different. This time, it sounds like an accusation, a reminder of promises broken and faith betrayed. They are not singing about the emperor who rules from his golden throne, but about the emperor who supposedly cares about the least of his subjects, who weeps for their suffering, who wants them to live with dignity rather than merely survive. "Gas them," Brashin orders, his patience finally exhausted. "Clear the area and arrest anyone who resists." The gas canisters arc through the air like falling stars, exploding into clouds of choking white smoke that burn the eyes and sear the lungs. But this time the crowd does not scatter immediately. They continue to sing even as their voices grow hoarse, continue to link arms even as their bodies convulse with chemical irritation. "The Emperor protects." They chant through the toxic fog, their words a challenge to everything we represent. "The Emperor provides." The Emperor loves his children. I watch through my helmet's optical filters as enforcement teams move in with shock prods and neural restraints, beating down anyone who tries to maintain their position. The old man who had defended Sarah Chen falls first, his frail body no match for ceramite armor and sanctioned violence. Sarah Chen herself is dragged away in restraints that spark against her skin with each involuntary movement. Within minutes, the distribution center is empty except for the unconscious forms of those who had tried to defend compassion against law. The order has been restored, the threat to public peace has been eliminated. Imperial justice has once again proven that it cannot be challenged without consequences. But as I stand in the settling gas cloud, Watching medical teams process the casualties of our success, I finally understand what Judge Vex had been trying to tell me. This is not law enforcement. This is not justice. This is not even effective oppression. This is the death throes of a system so fundamentally broken that it can only maintain itself by destroying everything good that tries to grow within it. We are not the guardians of civilization. We are its gravediggers, working tirelessly to bury any hope that things might be different. The mask never comes off because there is no longer anything human underneath it. The armor never comes off because it has become our skin, fused with flesh that has forgotten how to feel anything but the weight of another day's complicity in our own damnation. And in the depths of the hive, where 3 million souls struggle against a system designed to crush them into compliance, the police of Warhammer 40,000 continue their eternal patrol, maintaining order through violence and ensuring that hope remains the most dangerous contraband in the galaxy. The sixth day brings no orders, no alarms, no immediate crises demanding the application of sanctioned force. Instead, it brings a silence that feels more oppressive than any riot, a quiet that speaks of communities destroyed and spirits broken by the efficient brutality of imperial justice. I walk through corridors that felt different just a week ago, when laughter occasionally echoed off metal walls and children sometimes played games that had nothing to do with preparing for industrial servitude. Now, the passages are filled with the kind of silence that comes after violence, when people learn that hope itself is a crime punishable by exile or death. The illegal stall where the woman had sold water filters and protein bars stands empty, its location marked only by rust stains on the floor where her goods once rested. The children who had shared gruel behind her makeshift counter are nowhere to be seen, presumably placed in imperial orphanages, where they will be taught that kindness is weakness and mercy is the luxury of those who do not understand the necessity of order. In Hab Block Delta 7, the door to the meeting room where Jorik Ven had organized community discussions hangs broken on its hinges, a reminder that gathering for any purpose other than work or worship requires authorization from authorities who will never grant it. The space beyond is empty, except for a few scattered chairs and the lingering scent of fear. The food distribution center where Sarah Chen had shown dangerous compassion operates with mechanical efficiency under new management, a supervisor who understands that regulations exist to be followed rather than interpreted through the lens of human need. The lines of citizens waiting for their allocations move more slowly now, processed by someone who has learned that kindness is a career-ending mistake in the service of the Imperium. I should feel satisfaction at the completion of a successful operation. Seditious activity has been suppressed, order has been restored, the law has been upheld through the application of appropriate force. By any measurable standard, the pacification sweep was a complete success. Instead, I feel the weight of something dying inside me, some last vestige of the man who had believed that service to the Emperor meant protecting his people rather than oppressing them. That man had died slowly over 23 years of small compromises and necessary evils, but his final breath came during the gas attack on citizens whose only crime was singing hymns while authority prepared to destroy their community. My Vox bead crackles to life, calling me to witness the final chapter of our success. The transport ships carrying arrested dissidents are preparing for departure to penal facilities scattered throughout the sector, places where hope goes to die in service to the greater good of maintaining social order. The loading docks occupy the lowest levels of the precinct fortress, vast caverns carved from living rock and filled with the industrial machinery of incarceration. Transport cages line the platform like metal coffins, each one filled with human beings who had believed that suffering might be alleviated rather than simply accepted. I watch as families are separated, children torn from parents who may never see them again. I observe as communities are scattered, their bonds of mutual support severed by the cold efficiency of administrative processing. I witness as hope itself is loaded into cargo holds and shipped away to places where it will be methodically destroyed through labor and isolation. Helena Voss stands in one of the transport cages, her hands gripping the bars as she searches the crowd of observers for some sign of the mercy that had been promised and then betrayed. When her eyes meet mine through my helmet's red lenses, I see not accusation but forgiveness, as if she understands that I too am a victim of a system too vast and terrible for any individual to resist. Jorik Ven occupies another cage, his dignity intact despite the neural restraints that bind his hands and the gag that silences his voice. Around him sit the other members of his community organization, men and women whose only crime was believing that cooperation might improve their circumstances. Sarah Chen is locked in a maximum security transport, her 20 years of faithful service forgotten in favor of her final act of unauthorized compassion. The citizens she had helped are not present to see her departure, warned away by the memory of gas clouds and shock prods that had greeted their attempt to defend her. As the transports prepare for departure, Watch Commander Brashen approaches with a data slate containing my next assignment. His voice carries the satisfaction of someone who has successfully completed a distasteful but necessary task. Excellent work on the pacification sweep, Arbitrator. Order has been restored to the residential sectors. Seditious activity has been suppressed. The threat to public peace has been eliminated. I take the data slate and scan its contents, reading orders that will send me back into the corridors of the hive to continue the eternal patrol that keeps 3 million souls in line through the application of fear and the systematic destruction of hope. However, Brashen continues, there has been one complication. The complication, as it turns out, is me. Surveillance footage of my interactions with the illegal stall operator, combined with reports of my unusual questioning during the mission briefing, has raised concerns about my reliability as an instrument of imperial justice. These concerns have been noted in my personnel file and forwarded to appropriate authorities for review. Judge Vex wants to see you after the transports depart. Brashen informs me with the clinical detachment of someone delivering a death sentence. She has some questions about your recent performance. I watch the transport ships lift off from their berths, carrying their human cargo toward destinations that exist only to break spirits and destroy communities. The ships disappear into the artificial sky of the hive's upper reaches, leaving behind empty cages and the lingering scent of despair. The walk back to Judge Vex's chambers feels like a journey to my own execution, each step carrying me closer to a reckoning I have been expecting since the moment I chose mercy over duty. The corridors of the fortress seem longer than before, the Gothic arches more oppressive, the carved gargoyles more vindictive in their eternal watch. Judge Vex waits behind her marble desk, the same data slates glowing before her with their soft electronic light. But this time, I know that the information they contain concerns not distant threats to public order, but the specific case of an arbitrator who has forgotten the fundamental truth that mercy is the enemy of law. Arbitrator Morn, please, sit. The invitation is delivered with the courtesy due to someone about to die with dignity, a gesture of respect for service rendered before that service is permanently terminated. I take the offered chair and wait for judgment to fall like an executioner's blade. 23 years, she begins, her voice carrying the weight of decades spent in service to imperial justice. 23 years of faithful service, compromised by a moment of weakness that has inspired seditious activity throughout the residential sectors. She activates one of her data slates, filling the air above her desk with holographic displays of surveillance footage, personnel reports, and psychological evaluations that dissect my recent actions with clinical precision. Helena Voss, granted administrative punishment instead of the execution or lifelong imprisonment that imperial law required. The illegal stall operator, allowed to escape rather than being arrested for commercial violations. Questions about rules of engagement that suggest uncertainty about the application of appropriate force. The evidence is damning and undeniable. I have violated the fundamental principles that govern the behavior of imperial law enforcement, showing mercy where strength was required, hesitating where certainty was demanded, questioning where obedience was the only acceptable response. Do you have anything to say in your defense? The question is rhetorical, a formality that must be observed before sentence is passed. But I find myself answering anyway, speaking truth that I know will only confirm my guilt. I have served the Emperor's law for 23 years, and in all that time, I have never once made the galaxy a better place. I have suppressed riots by people whose only crime was hunger. I have arrested mothers whose only crime was trying to feed their children. I have enforced regulations designed by people who mistake cruelty for strength and oppression for order. Judge Vex listens without interruption, her pale eyes fixed on mine with the intensity of someone cataloging the symptoms of a terminal disease. I became an arbitrator because I believed in justice, but there is no justice in a system that criminalizes hope and punishes compassion. There is only order maintained through fear, compliance enforced through violence, and the systematic destruction of everything that makes life worth living. I pause, surprised by the relief I feel at finally speaking these thoughts aloud, even knowing that they constitute a confession of heresy punishable by death. The law is wrong, Judge Vex. Not technically incorrect or poorly applied, but fundamentally morally wrong, and I can no longer serve a law that makes monsters of those who enforce it and victims of those who live under it. The silence that follows is profound, broken only by the distant hum of air recyclers and the soft whisper of data processing from the fortress's machine spirit. Judge Vex deactivates her holographic display and leans back in her chair, studying me with eyes that have seen too much truth over too many years. Do you know why the Imperium exists, Arbitrator? The question is unexpected, a philosophical inquiry rather than the practical matters of guilt and punishment I had anticipated. To serve the Emperor's will? No. The Imperium exists because the alternative to the Imperium is extinction. Not just death, but the complete annihilation of human consciousness in a galaxy filled with entities that view our species as either food or entertainment. She stands and walks to the great windows that overlook the Hive City, her silhouette dark against the artificial sky beyond. You speak of hope as if it were a virtue rather than a weapon turned against those who dare to feel it. You speak of compassion as if it were strength rather than weakness that invites exploitation by enemies who understand only power. Her reflection in the window shows an expression of infinite weariness, as if she is tired of explaining truths that should be obvious to anyone who understands the nature of the universe. The law is not wrong, Morn. The law is necessary. Harsh, yes, cruel perhaps, but necessary in ways that those who live under its protection can never fully understand. She turns back to face me, and I see something in her eyes that I had never noticed before. Doubt. Not about the righteousness of imperial law, but about the cost of enforcing it on people who deserve better than the universe they were born into. However, you are also not wrong. The system we serve does indeed make monsters of its enforcers and victims of its subjects. That is the price of survival in a galaxy where the alternative to monstrous order is beautiful chaos that leads inevitably to extinction. Judge Vex returns to her desk and picks up a final data slate, one that glows with the soft amber of sealed orders. You are being transferred, Arbitrator, effective immediately. Your new assignment will take you far from the residential sectors where your moment of mercy has inspired dangerous hope among the masses. The transfer orders assign me to the outer hive, to the industrial zones where humans work alongside servitors and machines in conditions that make the residential sectors seem luxurious by comparison. Here, hope died so long ago that mercy would be seen not as inspiration but as madness. You will find your new posting educational. The citizens you will be policing have learned truths about imperial benevolence that make your recent crisis of faith seem quaint by comparison. Perhaps exposure to their reality will remind you why the law must be absolute, even when that absolutism seems cruel to those who have never seen true cruelty. I take the transfer orders with hands that feel steady for the first time in days. This is not the execution I had expected, but it is still a kind of death. The man who had believed that service to the Emperor meant protecting his people will not survive in the outer hive, where protection means ensuring that desperate people do not interfere with industrial production. One final question, Judge. Why show me mercy when I showed it to others? The question seems to surprise her, as if mercy is a concept she had not considered in the context of our interaction. Because, Arbitrator Morn, someone must remember what we have lost in order to survive. Someone must carry the weight of what we might have been, even as we do what we must be. Your moment of weakness serves a purpose in the greater design of imperial justice, even if that purpose is simply to remind us that we are still human beneath the armor we can never remove. I stand to leave, but her voice stops me at the door one final time. The mask never comes off because the face beneath it has seen too much truth about what survival requires in this universe. But sometimes, just sometimes, it is necessary to remember that there is still a face underneath, that we have not yet become the machines we serve alongside. The transport that carries me toward the outer hive passes through layers of increasing industrial density, where the air grows thick with chemical vapors and the walls pulse with the rhythm of massive engines. Here, in the depths of imperial civilization, I will begin the next chapter of my service to a law that I now understand is both absolutely necessary and absolutely wrong. The mask will never come off, but perhaps that is as it should be. Perhaps the face beneath it is indeed too terrible for ordinary mortals to bear, corrupted by years of necessary compromises and essential evils. Perhaps the armor has become my skin, fused with flesh that has forgotten how to feel anything but the weight of duty. But in the depths of memory, I will carry the image of Helena Voss walking free from an interrogation room, her step light with hope that proved too dangerous for the system to tolerate. I will remember the old man who fell in a corridor and the dignity that died in his eyes when authority chose fear over compassion. I will hold on to the sound of citizens singing hymns while gas clouds choked the breath from their lungs. These memories will serve no practical purpose in the outer hive, where hope died so long ago that mercy would be meaningless. But they will remind me that once, for just a moment, I chose to be human instead of just another instrument of imperial oppression. And in a galaxy where such moments are rarer than diamonds and more dangerous than heresy, perhaps that is enough. The police of Warhammer 40,000 continue their eternal patrol, maintaining order through fear and ensuring that hope remains the most closely guarded contraband in the galaxy. We are the enforcers of a system that devours its own children in the name of survival, the guardians of an order built on the systematic destruction of everything that makes life worth living. We wear our masks because the faces beneath them have seen too much truth about what civilization requires when the alternative is extinction. We carry our weapons because violence is the only language that chaos understands. We serve a law that is both our salvation and our damnation, the price we pay for continued existence in a universe that wants nothing more than to see us dead. The Emperor protects, as the children learn to sing in school, but down here, in the darkness where his light cannot reach, we are the ones who decide what protection means. We are the price of order in a galaxy gone mad. We are the necessary evil that keeps billions alive by ensuring they never truly live. And somewhere in the outer hive, where hope goes to die and dreams are recycled into industrial lubricant, a new chapter begins in the endless story of what justice means when survival is the only law that matters.